Pike. I let Gus out. The old fella had slept his drunk off. I sincerely hope I persuaded him to let up a bit. If the Baker boys start causing trouble again, lock them up. They've had enough reprimands. If worse comes to worse, remember that Dogwood is full of fine people. Never let the frustration get to you. It's worth protecting. You owe them your best. I, meanwhile, suppose I owe you an explanation for my absence. Last night I was bending an elbow at the saloon and was not suffering a crowd. Some trouble out at the mine had led to a delayed payroll delivery, depriving the miners of their money and the soiled doves of the miners. Ever the cautious man, I was gazing through the open entrance. Across the way, a lantern was illuminating the hip of no other than our local gravedigger. The question of what made him deem the saloon worthy of observation at that time of night piqued my interest, so I deemed him the same. He did not shift in place upon my approach, nor did he so much as change the direction of his stare. He merely held it upon the saloon. The hand that was not holding the lantern sat in his pocket. I said evening. He did respond accordingly, saying, "Good evening, Sheriff." I went and asked him, "What has come over you this night that you see fit to stand out here in the cold with that lantern?" To the point, as I always am. He replied, "I'm doing this as part of a commission." His response puzzled me so that I stood with him a moment, not knowing what to say. Then I managed, "Some sap paid you to tarry here and unnerve the sorry patrons of this saloon, myself included?" "Not so much," he said to me, briefly lifting his hand from his pocket to dig his fingers into his gray, wiry beard. "Out with it, man," I told him. "You recall the gypsies that passed through yesterday?" I did. "They left me a stiff, and with that stiff they gave me a beastly sum of money. They wanted him buried here special. Now mind you, I told them I didn't have no formaldehyde or whatever the hell else they're doing in the city nowadays, but they say they didn't mean nothing special like that." Preacher Lockheed passed in front of us, waving to us in the dark as he did. The gravedigger and I tipped our hats. If Lockheed had heard the cuss, he was pretending he hadn't. "Continue," I said. "They said to drive wood spikes through both shoulders and hands and put a shroud on him and then put a rock in his mouth, big enough that it opens all the way. Then I was to put an iron chain with a lock around the coffin, lock the chain, and say the Lord's Prayer. And I was told that if I valued my life, I'd double check I did it all correctly." He spat on the ground before him, more of a force of habit than a statement. "Gonna take more than that to wash out them lies," I said. "Ain't lying, and all that still got nothing to do with this." I gestured to him, standing as he was. It occurred to me as I looked to our gravedigger, he was turning something over, an object in his pocket. "They told me that after he was buried, I was to watch the saloon for him to show up. You had the time?" I snaked out my watch. 12:10. He sighed. He seemed almost disappointed. "Look like that's it. I'll be moseying along. Night, Sheriff." I lit up a cigarette I'd stowed away for a chilly occasion such as this. "You mind showing me this grave?" He cast his shoulders up. "Not if it suits you. Beware, Sheriff. I lead a boring life." Dogwood's bustle, that usually persists after sunset, seemed to have quit early. Even the Baker boys were absent from the usual areas they frequent. Our breath blew out and above us in clouds like a steam engine. As we marched up the hill, traipsed up north, past the general store where Mrs. Oakfield seemed to have put a fancy-looking washtub in the display window. Past the mine, vacant of its workers for the night. Past the tree line and up to the hilltop where the graveyard resides. Some of the folks say the graveyard is older than the rest of the town, and that the first piece of wood be driven into the ground at Dogwood was the base of a cross. When I saw the graveyard, my lips nearly released my cigarette. Freshly moved dirt was strewn about the place, a thin layer covering some of the markers. Several crosses were askew or unearthed entirely. Rather than appearing like the aftermath of a hasty grave robbery, the area was misplaced as though there was an impact or an explosion originating from a single grave, though such a noise should have been audible from the middle of town. The coffin lid had been opened, and the chain had been violently broken off. We stood aghast, not knowing what to say to one another, until the gravedigger broke the silence. "It is possible," he said, a smile inching across his face as he pulled a stone from his pocket, "that I goofed on a step or two." Then he added, "By God, it's real." I sent him home. It wasn't because I thought he would get in my way, but because he disturbed me now. I felt I had learned something about him which I could not stand. I borrowed his lantern. I examined the area and found shoe prints in the unsettled earth leading off northwest towards Cope's Landing. Prints were all wrong. Sideways, far apart, and interspersed with handprints from hands with nails that were hooked and pointed. I could see by the way the tracks were made that wherever it was going quick. The inside of the coffin was lined with a red, gelatinous substance that I dare not touch with my bare hands. The Baker family went up there just before sundown, so I don't know how someone could have even attempted to fake it in all the time that they would have had. I followed the easy trail until it receded into a dense tree line. I considered returning at dawn when my eye was taken by a pale cloth hanging from a branch. It was damp, had a tear through the middle, and reeked of the grave. There's more, though. I'm still not certain if I believe all that I've collected. Still, my gut tells me that there could be people hurt, and I can't ignore that. That's why I've left you this note. For a week, I want you to watch the saloon until midnight. After that, if I have not returned, you'll be the new sheriff. If I do return, and it's close to midnight, and I seem more keen on greeting the saloon than you, be sure you stop me by any means necessary, even if those means are rocks, stakes, or chains.